The champagne for my sister's wedding cost more than the medication that was keeping me alive. And my mother knew it. She knew it the way she knew the caterer's name, and the thread count of the tablecloths. She had a spreadsheet for the flowers. She did not have one for me. I was 19. My kidneys were failing, and I had a surgery date on the calendar in blue ink. Then my mother asked me in her calm church voice if I could push it back. Just 6 weeks so the wedding wouldn't be ruined. I remember thinking I had misheard. I had not. But the folder a little girl put in my hands 10 years later at my sister's front door. That is the part one still cannot believe. Welcome back to Revenge Range, where we tell the quiet stories of women who were underestimated by the people who should have loved them most and who found their footing anyway. If a family ever made you feel like you had to earn your place at the table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Susan Carter, and at 19, I was 2 months from a library science certificate and a lifetime of quiet shelves. I loved order. I loved the way a book found its way back to the right spot on the right shelf, spine out, everything where it belonged. My body was the one thing I could not file correctly. The diagnosis had a long name and a short meaning. My kidneys were quitting, and I needed a transplant before dialysis became my whole life instead of a detour through it. The miracle, and I did think of it as a miracle, was that I already had a donor. A classmate named Marcy, a girl I had tutored through statistics until she cried with relief over a passing grade, turned out to be a match, and she volunteered without blinking. She said I had saved her semester, so she might as well save the rest of me. The hospital penciled us in for a Tuesday in June. I taped the date to my bathroom mirror, where I would see it every morning. For the first time in over a year, I let myself imagine being well. Imagine a life that was not organized around blood tests. I should have known better than to leave a good thing sitting out in the open in that house, unguarded, where someone could decide it was in the way. You have to understand the weather in our home to understand what came next. My sister Vanessa was 2 years younger than me, and had been the sun since the day she was born. Everything in the house bent toward her light. Her recital ran long and we clapped. Her mood set the temperature at dinner. Her plans became the family's plans quietly without a vote ever being taken. That spring, the plan was a wedding and not a small one. Vanessa had met a man named Grant whose family owned a lake house and a boat with a name painted on the back. My mother, Margaret, treated the engagement like a promotion she had personally earned after years of service. There were cake tastings and fabric swatches and a photographer she found through a friend of a friend flown in from 2 states away because he had shot a wedding that ended up in a magazine. The champagne alone had a story. I heard my mother tell a neighbor its price over the fence. The way other people confess a sin, proud and a little breathless, she could recite the cost of that champagne to the penny. Nobody in that kitchen ever recited the price of my medication. It simply appeared on the counter, or it did not, and I learned not to ask which week it would be. The collision was right there on the calendar for anyone willing to look. My surgery sat 11 days before the wedding. Recovery would keep me flat and off my feet for the ceremony, maybe propped in a chair at the reception, pale and stitched, but present, close enough to hear the vows. I thought that was fine. I thought a family could hold a wedding and a saved life in the same 2 weeks and call it a good June. My mother did not see a blessing. She saw a scheduling problem. She brought it up on a Sunday while folding cloth napkins into swans for the reception, not looking at me, her voice as smooth as the linen in her hands. She wondered aloud whether the surgery could move, whether I really needed it in that exact window, or whether the doctors were just being cautious the way doctors are. I laughed, a short surprised sound, because I was certain it was a joke. The kind of dark joke tired families make. She did not laugh back. She did not even pause the folding. She just kept making swans, one perfect bird after another, lined up on the table, waiting patiently for me to be reasonable about the timing of my own body. I called my nephrologist the next morning, hoping she would settle it with a hard no I could carry home like a shield and hold up at dinner. She did not soften a single word. She said the June date had been chosen for a reason, and the reason was me. My numbers were sliding month over month. Push the surgery, she said, and I would almost certainly need emergency dialysis to bridge the gap, a catheter placed in my chest, a machine 3 mornings a week, and a real measurable chance the delay would cost me function I would never get back. Kidneys do not wait for weddings, she said, not unkindly. She used the word urgent twice, and she asked me to please not gamble with the window I had. I wrote it all down in my careful librarian hand, every phrase, and I drove home with the note writing on the passenger seat like a second passenger who agreed with me. I thought facts would be enough. I thought a doctor's words in my own handwriting would finally weigh something. In that house, though, facts were just my opinion dressed up with extra steps, and my opinion had never moved the weather an inch. I brought the note to dinner because dinner was where verdicts were handed down in our family. Always over food, always with everyone watching. I read the doctor's words out loud, my voice steadier than my hands, which had started to tremble somewhere around the word catheter. My mother listened the way you listen to a weather report for a town you will never visit, politely from a distance. When I finished, she set down her fork with a small click. 6 weeks. She said, "It is 6 weeks, Susan. Your sister only gets married once, and you have always been the strong one, so please do not be selfish about a calendar." My father, Robert, studied his plate as if the answer were written in the gravy. He did not lift his head. I waited for him to say something, anything, the way a daughter waits. I waited a long time. The only sounds in that room were the tick of the clock over the stove and the small wet click of my mother chewing, unbothered, entirely certain, already moving the conversation onto seating charts before I had even closed the note. Here is the part people always want to argue with, so let me say it plainly and only once. I was not a child who could sign her own forms and fix this alone. I was 19, still on my parents' health insurance, and every piece of the hospital billing ran through my father's name because the policy was his, and I was a dependent on it. I did try. I called the surgical scheduler myself the very next day, and asked in my most organized voice how to protect my date. She was kind and genuinely sorry, and completely clear. Any change to the timing and any guarantee on payment had to be confirmed by the policyholder of record. That was my father. So I went to him. I asked him twice in the hallway quietly away from my mother to just make the call, and hold the line for me. Both times he said he would talk to your mother. He always said he would talk to your mother, as if she were a border he could not cross without a visa. The date I had taped to my mirror was mine in ink, and no one else is in power. And I was old enough to feel the trap, and too young to spring it. The engagement party was the night it all went public. 40 people in the backyard. String lights crisscrossed over the lawn. That famous champagne poured into rented glasses. I found my mother near the dessert table between conversations and I set it low. Only for her. The way you tell someone a secret you are ashamed to need. I said I was scared. I said the doctor had used the word urgent twice, and that I did not want to wait. That 6 weeks felt like a bet I could lose. She turned to me and she raised her voice. Just enough, just loud enough to carry to the nearest cluster of guests. "Oh honey," she said, bright as the lights, "don't be so dramatic." It landed like a slap made of sugar, sweet on the outside and stinging underneath. Heads turned. A couple of people smiled. The tolerant smile adults give a child pitching a fit. My aunt found something fascinating in her wine. Not one person in that yard said a word for me. I stood there under all those pretty lights and understood completely that my fear was an inconvenience to the party. Don't be so dramatic. I would carry that sentence for the next 10 years like a stone in my coat. So I waited. I want you to sit with how ordinary that sentence sounds, and how it actually felt. I pushed my surgery back 6 weeks. I started dialysis in a cold beige room with a television bolted to the ceiling, and magazines 2 years out of date. And I watched my sister get married 11 days later in a dress that cost more than a used car in a garden that had been trimmed for a month. I sat near the back in a borrowed cardigan because I was cold all the time now. And under the sleeve of that cardigan, I wore a hospital identification bracelet, thin plastic, my name, and a number printed on it, impossible to take off without scissors. I clapped when everyone clapped. I smiled for the photographer flown in from 2 states away, gave him my good side, held my hand with the bracelet in my lap. My mother glowed like the mother of the year. My father gave a toast about how family is everything, everything. And people dabbed their eyes. I looked down at the bracelet under my sleeve and thought. Everything has a spot on the shelf. And mine is the back row. I did not cry at the wedding. I saved all of it for later alone, where it could not ruin a single photograph. The surgery finally happened 6 weeks late, and the delay left its fingerprints on everything. There was a complication during recovery, manageable in the end, but real. Exactly the kind the doctor had warned me about, the kind that simply would not have happened on the original June date. I spent longer in the hospital than I should have, in a shared room with a curtain for a wall, and a roommate who watched game shows at full volume. My mother sent flowers with a card written in the florist's looping handwriting, not her own. Vanessa was on her honeymoon on the coast, posting pictures of the boat with the name on it. My father visited exactly once, stood at the foot of the bed, checked his phone twice, and left before the dinner trays came. The only person who called me every single night without fail was my grandmother, my mother's mother, Rosalind, Nana. She asked what I was reading. She asked whether the nurses were kind to me. She never once told me I was strong, which was, I think, the kindest thing anyone did for me that entire year. She just stayed on the line in the dark, and let me be a person, who was hurting instead of a schedule to be managed around someone else's happiness. When I could finally stand without the room tilting, I made a decision that felt less like anger and more like exhaling. After holding my breath for a year, I packed one suitcase. I did not slam a door or make a speech, or write anyone a letter full of feelings. I filled out a change of address form at the post office, got a new phone number, and accepted a job 3 hours away at a small town library where nobody had ever heard the name Carter said with a raised eyebrow. I told my parents I was leaving in a note as plain as a grocery receipt, taped to the fridge next to the seating chart that was still hanging there weeks after the wedding. My mother called it overreacting. My father said we would talk soon. We did not talk soon or ever. I drove out of that town with my new library card in the cup holder, and my old hospital bracelet zipped into the side pocket of the suitcase because some things you keep on purpose to remember exactly what they cost. I honestly thought leaving was the end of the story. It turned out to be barely the first chapter. The new town was called Alder Creek, and it did not care in the slightest where I had come from. I unpacked my whole life into a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store close enough to the tracks that I learned the freight schedule by heart. I was good at the work from the first week. I was even better at being alone, better than any person really should be. I took the extra shifts nobody wanted. Covered the front desk on holidays when families were home together. Learned every regular patron's overdue habits so I could forgive their late fees before they had to ask. Mr. Perkins with his westerns, the twins who fought over the same dinosaur book. I built a small orderly world and told myself it was peace. And honestly, some of it was. But I never once asked anyone for help. Not the day I sprained my wrist, reshelving the reference section, and drove myself to the clinic, steering with one hand. Not ever. Somewhere along the way, I had made a quiet deal with myself, and the terms were simple. If I could just be useful enough, quiet enough, easy enough to have around, then I would never again be a bother to a single soul. I did not yet see whose voice had written that contract, or that I had signed it in a backyard full of string lights. There was one voice that had never once fit the terms of that deal, and it belonged to Nana. She kept calling, even after I moved, even the weeks I was too tired to say more than a few words. She had run a small publishing house her entire adult life, a real one, with a warehouse and a loading dock, and authors who mailed her Christmas cards every December. When I was small, She used to let me sit in the corner of her office and read the galley proofs nobody else wanted. Taught me to smell the ink and love it. And once when I came home from grade school absolutely certain I was too much, too loud, too needy, that the other girls had voted on it, she pulled me onto her couch and said the thing I would carry for the rest of my life. You were never too much, sweetheart. You were just around people who wanted too little. I did not really understand it at 19, sitting in a dialysis chair. I did not understand it in Alder Creek either, not fully. I only understood it years later, standing on a doorstep in the wrong season light, holding a folder a child had handed me. But I kept the sentence anyway, the way you keep a key before you have found the lock. The calls thinned out that winter, and I felt the thinning before I understood it. The way you notice a room getting colder before you notice the window is open. When I phoned the house to check, my mother answered in her weather report voice, the pleasant one she used for strangers and inconveniences. Nana was under the weather, she said. Nothing serious. No need to make a fuss over it. I asked to speak to her. My mother said she was resting just then. I asked again the following week, and again she was resting. I offered to drive down for a weekend and sit with her. My mother said gently that Nana did not want company in that state, that she was a proud woman and hated being seen unwell, that I would only tire her out and upset her. And the awful thing was that it sounded exactly like something Nana would say. It also sounded exactly like something my mother would invent out of thin air. I could not tell which it was, and that not knowing is a special kind of cruelty, the kind that keeps you sitting politely by the phone while a door somewhere quietly, permanently swings shut. I tried to go anyway. I want that on the record for the girl I was. I requested a Friday and Saturday off, mapped the 3-hour drive on paper, packed a small bag, and left it by the door so I could not talk myself out of it. Then 2 days before I meant to leave, my mother called with an update. Nana had rallied. She said she was sitting up now eating soup, complaining about the television being too loud, back to her cranky self. There was no reason to come rushing down and disrupt her rest. She said I should save the trip for when Nana was truly herself again, and could enjoy the visit. And I believed her because I wanted to believe her, and because believing her was so much easier than driving 3 hours to be turned away at a door in front of the neighbors. I put the bag back in the closet. I told myself soon. I have spent a very long time forgiving the girl who put that bag back, who chose soon, who trusted a woman whose entire life was a beautifully arranged surface with nothing underneath. She would let you see. Nana died on a Tuesday, and I did not find out until Friday. Not from a phone call, from a sympathy card that a distant cousin, meaning well, mailed to my old address, which the post office then forwarded to Alder Creek, so that it landed in my mailbox for full days after the funeral was over, the guests gone home, the flowers already going brown in the church trash. I sat down on the floor of my little apartment with the card open in my lap, and could not make the words hold still on the paper with deepest sympathy in your loss. There had been a service. There had been a viewing with an open casket, and a receiving line. There had been an entire room full of people who loved her or claimed to, and not one of them had picked up a phone to make sure I knew. My mother had my number. My mother had my forwarding address on a form I had filled out myself. My mother had somewhere in the planning of the flowers, and the guest list simply decided that I did not need to be told. The one person who had stayed on the line with me in the dark was gone, and I had missed the chance to say goodbye by 3 days, and one phone call that somebody chose not to make. I drove down that weekend anyway, not to the house, never to the house, but to the cemetery on the edge of town where the Carters had been buried for 3 generations. I found the fresh grave by the color of the dirt, still dark and mounded, not yet settled or seeded. Someone had left a spray of leaves that were already wilting at the edges, curling brown. I had not brought flowers. I had brought a paperback instead, an old galley she had given me years before, its cover soft as cloth from handling, my childhood notes still penciled in the margins. I stood there in my coat in the cold and I read her a chapter out loud, start to finish, because reading to each other had been the only religion the two of us ever shared, the only church we needed. My voice shook and I let it. I did not knock on any doors in that town. I did not call a single person. When the chapter was done, I closed the book, said goodbye the way you say it to someone who can no longer be embarrassed by tears, and drove the 3 hours home. I cried on the highway where no photographer could catch me. I thought that was the bottom of it. I did not yet know there was a floor beneath the floor. My mother called me about a week after that, and the call was strange in a way I could not name while it was happening. She was almost gentle, which frightened me far more than her sharpness ever had, because gentle was not a tool she reached for, unless she wanted something. She said she was sorry I had missed the service, that it had all happened so quickly, that she had tried and tried to reach me and simply could not. I did not point out that I had a phone, and a listed address. Then with no prompting from me at all, she said the thing that snagged in me like a fish hook, and would not come loose. She said, and you know, dear, Nana did not leave anything behind. So please don't go getting ideas in your head. She barely had 2 nickels to rub together at the end. I had not said one word about money. I had not so much as thought about money. I had been thinking about a woman who read to me in the dark and asked if the nurses were kind. But my mother had brought it up unasked, all on her own, wrapped in false comfort, and something deep in me went very still, and very quiet, and began for the very first time to wonder what exactly she was so eager to make sure I would not expect. I did not act on that. Wondering, not for a long time. Some part of me was afraid of what I might find. And a larger part had simply run out of energy for that family. So instead of digging, I built something. The Alder Creek Library had a dead corner by the emergency exit that nobody used. All shadow and dust. I turned it into a reading nook for kids whose homes did not have books in them. And there were more of those kids than the town liked to admit. I begged donations from the Rotary and the church rummage sale, hauled in second-hand bean bags, painted a cheerful sign, and started a story hour on Saturday mornings. There was one boy, maybe 8 years old, who came every single week in the same thin jacket regardless of the weather, and who read like the words were food, and he had been hungry a long time. He reminded me painfully of a girl I used to be. One who believed she had to stay small and quiet to be allowed to remain in the room at all. One Saturday, I told him he could take any book home he wanted. No library card required, no questions asked ever. He looked up at me like I had handed him a key to a locked room he had been pressing his face against for years. I did not know it then, but I was quietly rehearsing the rest of my life. The work studied me the way order had always studied me, the way a well-shelved section can make a whole day feel survivable. But steadiness is not the same thing as peace. And I knew the difference on the bad nights, the ones that came without warning. I would lie awake above the hardware store and run the arithmetic of my own worth, the same cold math my mother had taught me without ever sitting me down to teach it. Was I useful this week? Was I easy to be around? Had I earned my spot on the shelf? Or was I overdue, about to be pulled and discarded? I did not yet understand that this was her voice living rent-free in my head, wearing my own voice like a borrowed coat, so I would not recognize the intruder. I honestly believed I had left that house behind me for good. In truth, I had only moved out of the building. The lease on that particular belief that I was only as lovable as I was useful was going to take years to break. And breaking it was going to cost me something real, though I could not have told you the price yet, or guessed who would arrive one day to hand me the bill. Vanessa reached out to me exactly once in all those years. A single text out of nowhere, a photograph of a newborn baby wrapped tight in a hospital blanket. Her daughter, Lily, 7 pounds and a startling full head of dark hair, born a little over a year after the wedding I had watched from the back row. I stared at that photo for a long time on my little kitchen table, longer than I would admit to anyone. I texted back my congratulations and a small heart because whatever my mother was and whatever Vanessa had let her be, that baby was innocent of all of it. And some stubborn part of me could not bring myself to slam a door on a child who had just arrived in the world. Vanessa did not write again after that. No follow-up, no photos of first steps, nothing. And I did not push because pushing had never once worked on that family. And I had learned to stop bruising my knuckles on locked doors. I filed the photo away in my phone the way I filed everything in my life, carefully, deliberately, in a spot I could find again later. I had no idea that little girl would one day stand at a door and hand me the entire truth. I only knew that her hair was dark like Nana's, and that even at 7, her eyes looked like they were already quietly reading the room. The call came on a Thursday in early spring, almost exactly 10 years after I had packed the one suitcase and driven away. An unfamiliar number, an area code I did not recognize, a young man's voice on the other end, careful and formal in the way of people who are nervous about getting something right. He said his name was David Smith, that he was a junior associate at a law office 2 counties over, and that he was trying to confirm he had reached Susan Carter, born in a certain year. Granddaughter of a woman named Rosalind. I said yes. Slowly, the librarian in me already flagging the strangeness of the whole thing, the way I would flag a book that had wandered into the wrong section. He asked if I had a few minutes to talk. I said I did. I sat down at my kitchen table and picked up a pen because I always sit down with a pen when something feels important. And I asked him plainly what this was about. There was a pause on the line then, the particular kind of pause that means a person is carefully choosing which words to say first. Then he told me that the office had been trying to find me, he said, for a very long time. Miss Carter, he said, your grandmother left something in your name, and we have been trying to locate you for years. I set the pen down on the table very carefully, as if it might roll away. Years. She had died 4 years earlier, and I had learned about her death from a sympathy card the post office had forwarded to me. I asked him what he meant by something. He said it would be far better to explain in person, that there were documents I truly needed to see with my own eyes, that this was not the sort of thing he was comfortable summarizing over a phone line. He asked if I could come into the office at my convenience. The sooner the better. I heard myself say yes, of course, this week from what felt like a great distance, as if I were listening to another woman agree to it. When I finally hung up, my kitchen was exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes earlier. The same chipped blue mug in the sink, the same stack of returns waiting by the door, the same freight train sounding 2 blocks over. And I sat there at the table in that unchanged room, understanding with absolute clarity that some part of my life had just split cleanly, quietly into a before and an after. If you have ever gotten a call that cut your life into a before and an after, then you know the silence I sat in that afternoon. Tell me in the comments, would you have opened the folder, or would you have driven away and left it buried? And if this channel keeps finding you, go ahead and hit subscribe. I did not sleep that night, and I did not spend the sleepless hours dreaming about money. I spent them stuck, turning over and over on a single word he had used, years. He had said the office had been searching for me for years, but I had not been hiding. Not for one day. I had a job with my name printed on a placard on the front desk of a public building open 6 days a week. I paid my taxes on time. I had a library card, a signed lease, a phone contract, all of it in my own legal name, Susan Carter, easy to find. Anyone who genuinely wanted to locate me could have done it in an afternoon with a phone, let alone a law office with a computer. So how does a professional law office spend years failing to find a woman who was never once lost? The only answer I could build in the dark, brick by unwilling brick, was one I did not want to hold. Somebody at some point had told them I could not be found, had told them, in effect, to stop looking. And there were only so many people in the entire world who would say a thing like that about me, and mean it, and have the standing to be believed. When I asked David Smith about it directly the next morning, he pulled the file while I was still on the phone, and I could hear papers shifting and settling on the other end. He was quiet for a moment, reading. Then he explained carefully that the original attorney on the matter, the one my grandmother had personally used to draw everything up, had been a solo practitioner in a different town, an elderly man who had retired not long after and then passed away himself. His client files had been boxed up, and were slow to be reassigned to another office, which was how a matter could sit untouched for years. That accounted for the delay on their end, and it was believable. The sad ordinary friction of paperwork and mortality, but it did not begin to explain the other thing. He said the contact information on record for the named heir had been marked in the file notes as no longer valid. The heir, the notes said, was believed to have relocated with no forwarding address and could not be reached. I told him flatly that I had filled out a forwarding address at the post office on the very day I left, that I had never been unreachable a single hour of those 10 years. He went very quiet again on the line. Then he said in a careful voice that he thought the two of us had better sit down and look through the file together, page by page. I took a personal day, the first one I had ever used in my entire time at the library. And before I left the apartment, I did something I had not done in a decade. I went to the closet, unzipped the side pocket of the old suitcase, and took out the hospital bracelet. It was still curled in the exact shape of the wrist of a 19-year-old girl, who had been told in front of 40 people not to be dramatic. The plastic had yellowed a little. My name and the number were still legible. I do not fully know why I brought it with me that day. Maybe I wanted a witness in the car. Maybe I wanted to remember in my body, and not just my head, what a folder full of paperwork had cost me the last time paperwork was allowed to decide the shape of my life. I put the bracelet in my coat pocket next to my keys where I could feel it. Then I drove 3 hours south to read a folder I had not known existed until 2 days before. I came back a different person entirely, and the woman I had been on the drive down did not survive the drive home. The office was small and smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, which I found unbearably, embarrassingly comforting, like a place I already knew. David Smith turned out to be younger than his phone voice, barely 30, and he handled the folder as if it might bruise, sliding it across the table with both hands, and then sitting back to give me room. "Take your time," he said. "There is no rush now." I opened it. I read the first page. It was my grandmother's will, drawn up quietly through her own attorney, dated years before her death. And the language was plain enough that even a shaking hand could follow every line. She had named me, not a share of something, not a keepsake, not a sentimental token. Me, Susan Carter, named as the sole heir to her publishing house and everything it contained, the whole of it. My hands went cold flat against the table. This, I understand now, was the exact point where my old life ended, because you cannot unknow a thing once the first page has told you the truth of it in black ink. I looked up at David Smith and found I could not make my voice work. He just nodded gently and said nothing, and let me read the whole page a second time to be sure my eyes had not invented it. The number came a page later, and when it came it did not feel like a number at all. Tens of millions all told, the publishing house and its catalog and its backlist and its warehouse and the land underneath it. An entire careful life's work rendered down into a figure with too many zeros to hold in one thought. I sat there in that little office and I did not think about what I could buy with it. Not a house, not a car, not a single thing. I thought instead about a woman on a couch telling a small, frightened girl that she was never too much. Nana had not left me money. That was not what this was. She had left me proof. Proof that at least one person in that entire family had looked directly at me and seen someone worth everything she had spent a lifetime building, and not someone to be quietly scheduled around a wedding. I put my hand flat on the page the way you rest your hand on a headstone, and I heard her voice as clearly as if she were in the room. "You were never too much, sweetheart." For the first time in 10 years, someone had valued me on purpose, in writing, witnessed, and notarized, and she had done it before she ever got sick, and then told no one who would ever pass it along to me. But the warmth lasted maybe a minute because the librarian in me could not stop asking the obvious, orderly question underneath the tears. If this document was signed and witnessed years ago in force and legal, then why on earth had it taken a decade, a dead attorney, a forwarded sympathy card, and a stranger's careful phone call for it to finally reach me? David Smith seemed to have been waiting for me to ask exactly that, bracing for it. He explained that the will named a temporary executor, someone to manage the estate, and handle notification of the heir until that heir could be located and take possession. He said that formal letters had gone out over the years, certified mail, return receipt requested, to the last known address the executive had on file for me. I asked him, my mouth suddenly dry, what the last known address on file had been. He turned a page, found the line, and turned the file around so I could read it myself. It was my parents' house. Every certified letter meant to tell me that my grandmother had chosen me, had loved me enough to leave me everything, had been mailed over and over, year after year, to the exact two people who had spent my whole life quietly deciding I was worth less than a party. He kept turning pages because a good file is thorough, and thorough is a terrible, merciless thing when you happen to be the subject of it. There were the certified mail records, dated and stamped. And there were the green return receipt cards, the small ones you signed to prove a letter arrived, and was accepted by a human hand. Someone had signed them. I knew the handwriting the way you know your own name, even when it is misspelled. Know it in your stomach before your brain catches up. It was my mother's. She had signed for the letters that were meant for me, accepted them at the door again, and again across the years. And beside one of the entries, in the executive's own neat notes, was a line stating that the heir had relocated out of state, and could not be reached, and that the family had promised to attempt to make contact on the office's behalf. I read it twice. My mother had received the news in a certified letter she signed for with her own hand that her mother had made me an heir. She had signed for it. Then she had told the lawyers I was lost, unreachable, gone. And then she had picked up the phone, and told me in her false gentle voice that Nana had barely 2 nickels to her name. This was not a mix-up. This was not a tragic clerical error. This was 10 years of deliberate choices made one signature at a time, at her own front door. I want to tell you the worst part because the worst part was never the money. And if you think it was the money, you have missed the whole shape of it. Sit with the timing instead. The will was signed, witnessed, and in full legal force before I was even 19. Before the wedding, before dialysis, before a single swan-folded napkin. If those certified letters had reached me when they were first sent, I would have been a young woman with her own resources, and her own name on her own bank accounts, and her own signature that meant something at a hospital. I would not have needed my father to make a phone call to protect my surgery. I would not have had to stand in a backyard and beg my mother for 6 weeks of my own life while 40 people watched. My mother did not only hide an inheritance from me across a decade. She hid the one single thing that would have let a scared 19-year-old girl stop asking permission to stay alive. She took my money, yes, but wound around the money. And worth far more than it, she took the entire version of that year in which I did not have to be small, did not have to be grateful, did not have to be quiet to be allowed to remain in the room. And here is exactly where I stopped being sad and started for the first time in my careful, quiet life to want something loud. I wanted them to see it. All of it. I sat in that little office and I pictured it in detail. Driving to my sister's house where my parents now spent their doing weekends fussing over Lily, and laying the whole folder open on the coffee table in front of everyone, the will, the signed green cards, the executive's noted lie, and then simply watching every single face in that room go white. I wanted my mother to feel the floor tilt under her the exact way she had made mine tilt in that backyard under the lights. I wanted my father to finally lift his head from his plate, and look at what his silence had helped bury. 10 years of don't be so dramatic. And here at last was the drama certified and notarized and impossible to wave away. For about a day that fantasy was the warmest thing I owned. I held it the way I had once held a surgery date taped to a bathroom mirror like proof that my life was finally about to be mine. It was David Smith who cracked the fantasy open, and he did it entirely by accident. As I was gathering up the copies he had made for me, sliding them into my bag, I said something offhand about finally making them understand what they had done to me. He was young and earnest, and he had clean hands in all of this. And so he asked me the simple question that only a person with clean hands would think to ask. And then what he said. He was not being cruel. He genuinely wanted to know. What do you want them to say? I opened my mouth to answer him, and found there was nothing in it because I did not actually want an apology. And I knew that the way I knew my mother's handwriting. Any apology from her would be a performance staged for whoever happened to be watching. A swan folded out of contrition. So what exactly was I driving toward? If I laid that folder down on the table purely to make them feel small, then I would be measuring my own worth by their reaction all over again. One more time, handing the ruler right back into my mother's hands. I drove the 3 hours home with the copies on the passenger seat, and that quiet question riding shotgun the whole way. I did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the night before. The first had been shock. This one was a decision trying to be born. I sat in the dark of my apartment above the hardware store, listening to the last freight of the night go through, and I thought about the boy in the thin jacket who read like the words were food. I thought about the dead corner I had turned into a reading nook. The second-hand bean bags, the key I had handed that boy to a locked room he had waited his whole small life to enter. I thought about a woman on a couch who told a scared girl she was never too much, and who had built an entire life, an entire company out of the simple act of putting words into people's hands. And somewhere in those long hours, the fantasy of white faces around a coffee table began to shrink and cool. And something else, something quieter and much, much larger, began to rise up and take its shape in the dark. I did not have the whole of it yet, but I had the edge of it under my fingers, and I could already feel that it was heavier and truer and far more permanent than revenge had ever been. In the morning, I called David Smith back and asked him a question that clearly surprised him because he went quiet for a second before he answered. I asked whether it was possible to place the entire inheritance, the publishing house, the catalog, the warehouse, the land, all of it, into a foundation, a trust set up so that its proceeds would fund small, free libraries in the exact kinds of neighborhoods where children came to reading in thin jackets and had to be told twice that a book could really be theirs. And then I asked the part that mattered most. Could I do it now? Immediately before I ever spoke a word to my family, before I sat in any room with my mother, he said it was possible. Yes, it would take signatures and a little time to structure properly, but the estate was mine to do with as I chose, and if I chose to give it away, no one could stop me. I told him to start drawing it up that day. I did not want to hold that money in my hands for even a single week, because holding it I already knew meant risking the temptation to lift it like a weapon. Some things you keep to remember what they cost you. This was a thing I needed to give away. To finally understand what it was worth. The family found out that I knew before I ever told them because small-town lawyers all seem to know small-town lawyers, and word travels along those wires faster than any letter. Vanessa called me, the first time she had called in years, and her voice came through careful and bright in a way that turned my stomach, because I had learned that exact brightness at my mother's knee, and could hear the machinery running under it. She said the family really should sit down together, all of us, and clear the air at last. She said Mom and Dad wanted to make things right, that too much time had gone by, that I should come to her house that Sunday afternoon so we could talk like family. And I could hear the strategy underneath every word, thin and see-through as a wedding veil. My parents were not sorry. Sorry was not in them. They were frightened. They had heard the word foundation, or the word heir from somebody. And now they wanted me in a room on their turf where my mother could manage the weather one more time the way she always had. I told Vanessa I would come. I had already decided precisely what I would be bringing with me, and it was not the thing any of them were bracing for. Before I hung up the phone with my sister, I finally understood the trap completely. And I understood that it was above all a trap I could set for myself and walk straight into. If I drove into that house on Sunday to win, to make them small, to finally be the one standing there holding the ruler over somebody else, then I would have become the exact thing that had broken me in the first place. My mother measured every person she met by their usefulness to her, weighed them, and shelved them accordingly. If I chose to measure her by how much she suffered when the truth landed, then I would just be her daughter after all, fluent in the same cruel arithmetic she had taught me at the dinner table. The only real way out of the trap was to refuse to play the game at all. I finally had the thing I had wanted for 10 long years, the proof, the leverage, the certified and notarized drama, all of it sitting in a folder on my passenger seat. And I understood with a clarity that felt almost like grief that it would poison me from the inside if I used it the way I so badly wanted to. So I decided to use it a completely different way instead, and to pay for that choice with the one thing in the world I had wanted most. I signed the papers on Friday, 2 days before I was due at my sister's house. David Smith laid them out on the same table where I had first read the will, page after page after page, and I put my careful librarian signature on every line, moving the entire inheritance out of my own hands and into the foundation before I ever set foot back in that town. The publishing house would keep running exactly as Nana had built it, its proceeds now flowing outward into free libraries, and the very first one would carry her name over the door. When the last signature was dry, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight since a backyard full of string lights 10 years before. Because now, whatever happened on Sunday, in whatever room, there was quite simply nothing left to divide, nothing to negotiate, nothing my mother could measure, weigh, or manage. I had made the choice unreachable on purpose, deliberately, so that no amount of weather in that house, no gentle voice, no raised voice could ever talk me back out of it. You cannot bargain with anyone for a thing that is already permanently gone. Sunday, I drove the 3 hours to my sister's house with a copy of the folder on the passenger seat beside me, and the old hospital bracelet in my coat pocket where I could feel it against my keys. I was not going to accuse anyone of anything. I had already done that math in the dark and found the answer empty. I was going to close a chapter that had stayed open and bleeding in me for 10 years, and I was going to do it on my own terms, in my own quiet voice. And then I was going to get back in my car and leave. Vanessa's house was nice, the specific kind of nice my mother had always approved of, brick and shutters, and a wreath on the door that was somehow the wrong season entirely. I sat in the car at the curb for a full minute with the engine ticking as it cooled. I touched the bracelet through the wool of my coat just once for the girl who had worn it. Then I got out, walked up the neat front path, and lifted my hand to knock on the door. The door opened before my knuckles ever touched it, and it was not my sister standing there, and it was not my mother. It was a girl of about 9, dark-haired and serious-eyed, and I knew her at once because she was exactly the child from a photograph I had filed away years before. Lily, she had a sealed folder held in both of her small hands, out in front of her like an offering at a church, and she looked up at me with my grandmother's own directness, sitting plainly in her little face. "Are you the aunt?" she asked me. "No, hello," I said that I was. She pushed the folder toward me until I had to take it. "Mommy said to give this to the lady who used to be sad," she said. Matter of fact, the way children hand you the heaviest truths without any idea of the weight in their hands. I took it. My own hands were not steady. My entire life had been arranged once so that a party would not be ruined. And now, 10 years later, a child was standing at a door handing me a sealed folder. And I did not yet have the faintest idea what was inside it. I stepped inside and there they were, the 3 of them, arranged in the living room like a careful still life of a family that had rehearsed. My mother sat composed on the sofa, hands folded in her lap, chin level. My father was in a chair by the window, older now, grayer, thinner, still studying the middle distance as though the answer might be out on the lawn. Vanessa hovered near the kitchen doorway, brittle and too bright. A dish towel twisted in her hands. The room smelled like coffee that no one was actually drinking. My mother spoke first. Of course she did, warm as a practiced hostess, and said she was so very glad I had come, that we were family after all, that whatever little misunderstandings had grown up between us over the years could surely be smoothed over now, all of us together. Like she was talking about a lunch that had been rescheduled once too often. I said nothing to that. I set the sealed folder Lily had handed me down on the side table, still unopened, and I took out my own copy instead, the one I had carried 3 hours in the car. And I understood that the whole room was quietly holding its breath, waiting to see which of the 2 daughters I had turned out to become. I did not raise my voice. I have never been any good at raising it. And I found standing there that I did not need it at all. I set my copy of the folder down on the coffee table in the center of them, and I opened it to the first page. "Read it," I said. "That is all. Just read it." And then I let the silence do the work my mother had spent her whole life doing with noise. My father leaned forward slowly in his chair. My mother did not move a muscle at first, but her eyes dropped to the page, and I stood there and watched the color drain out of her face one careful shade at a time as she recognized it. The will first, then the certified receipts, then, worst of all, her own signature looping across the little green cards over and over and over. Undeniable proof in her own hand that she had personally signed for the very letters meant to tell me I was chosen, was loved, was left everything, and had then turned around and told the lawyers that I was lost. Vanessa made a small broken sound from the doorway. My father slowly put his hand over his mouth and left it there. Nobody in that room said, "Don't be so dramatic." There was nothing dramatic left in the world for any of them to say. My mother recovered the only way she had ever known how to recover, by reaching for the ledger. Her voice found its footing again after a moment and she said, "Well, all right, then. The estate. We are all still family here. Surely there is a sensible way to divide it fairly among the four of us." And there it was, out loud. The arithmetic still running even now, even here, even with her own signature staring straight up at her from the table between us. I looked at her for a long quiet moment. "There is nothing to divide," I said. "I gave it away. All of it on Friday to a foundation that opens free libraries for children who cannot afford a single book of their own. I did it before I ever drove here so that you would know I did not come to be bought, and I did not come to be begged from, and I did not come here for an apology." Then I said the thing I had carried in my coat for 10 years and finally sat down on that table. "You spent my whole life deciding what I was worth. I am not going to spend the rest of mine waiting for you to change your mind." My mother's face broke. Not with sorrow. Never with sorrow, but with pure disbelief, and she said, "After everything we did for you, you would throw it all away." I stood up from the couch. "You threw it away first," I said. "I am only choosing where it lands." For once in the entire history of that family, the room did not rearrange itself around my mother. It was Vanessa who moved instead. She had been standing frozen in the kitchen doorway with one hand gripping the frame. And now she slid down into the nearest chair and began to cry. Real crying. The ugly kind. Nothing like the pretty tears from the wedding photographs. "I didn't know." She kept saying over and over. "I didn't know, Susan. I swear to God I didn't know. They told me you didn't want to come to the funeral. They told me you didn't care about Nana. That you had left us all behind. And the terrible thing, the thing I had not braced for, was that I believed her completely. She had been raised to be the sun. And nobody ever thinks to warn the sun about the long shadows it throws across everyone standing behind it. I did not go to her, and I did not cross the room to comfort her. But I looked past her shaking shoulders to the doorway where Lily stood, small and quiet, dark eyes taking in every single thing, and I thought that one still has a chance. That one does not have to learn the arithmetic. And that standing there was worth more to me than any grown face gone white with disbelief. I did not stay to watch the family try to sort out what it had just become. I picked up my own copy of the folder from the table, and I left the sealed one lying there for whoever wanted to open it. But before I turned to go, I reached into my coat pocket and took out the hospital bracelet, that thin curl of yellowed plastic a 19-year-old girl had worn to a wedding hidden under her sleeve, and I set it down on the table beside the will in plain view. I did not need to keep the proof that I had been hurt anymore. I had finally stopped measuring my own worth by what that house thought of it. And you simply do not need to hold on to the evidence for a verdict you have stopped waiting to hear. On my way out, I stopped in the doorway and said goodbye to Lily, and I told her quietly that she should come to the library sometime, that there would always be a book waiting for her. Then I walked back down the neat front path in the wrong season wreath light, and I did not slam the door behind me, and I drove the 3 hours home lighter than I had arrived. 6 months later, the first free library opened in a low-income neighborhood 2 towns over, in a bright storefront that had once been a laundromat and still had the tile floor. We put my grandmother's name up over the door in gold letters. Rosalind's room with shelves built low enough for small hands to reach without asking. On opening day, a boy in a thin jacket, not my boy from Alder Creek, but his cousin in every way that counted, pulled a picture book off the shelf and turned to find me, already asking with his eyes whether it was allowed. I told him it was his. No card needed, no questions asked. Not now and not ever. He did not thank me. He just sat straight down, cross-legged on the old tile floor, and started to read right there in the middle of everything like the words were food, and he had been hungry a long time, and not one person in that whole bright room asked him whether he was worth it. My mother sent me a message a few weeks after the opening. It was not an apology. She did not have those in her, and I had finally stopped waiting for a thing she simply did not stock. The message said only that the family should get together soon, that far too much time had passed, that we should all just put this whole business behind us now. I read it twice, standing in the doorway of Rosalind's room with the low murmur of children reading behind me. I felt no heat and no cold, which surprised me. She had not changed, and the world she came from had not changed either. The world where a lavish wedding still bought a woman more standing than a saved life ever could. I did not write back to her that day. I did not need to answer a summon to a table where I had never once been anything more than a place setting to be arranged and rearranged at someone else's convenience. Vanessa did change a little, which was more than I had ever let myself expect from anyone in that family. She started bringing Lily to the library on Saturdays, driving the whole distance without being asked, and sitting quietly in the back while her daughter worked her way along the shelves. We did not talk much. Not at first. We did not really have to. One Saturday, Lily brought a worn picture book up to the desk and asked me in that same direct grandmother voice whether she was allowed to take it home with her. I stamped the card and told her it was hers. She held it flat against her chest with both arms the entire way to the door. A girl learning this early, this young, that some things in the world are simply given freely, that you do not ever have to earn a place among the words. That right there was the chain breaking one small link in the only direction that had ever mattered. Kindness was never weakness, and being useful to someone was never once the same thing as being loved by them. I only needed to stop confusing the two. A postponed surgery, a bracelet worn under a sleeve, a little girl at a door with a sealed folder. If someone once made you earn a place that should have been yours from the very start, then hear this before you go. You were never too dramatic, and you were never too much. You were only ever standing among people who wanted too little. Subscribe to Revenge Range. Share this with the woman who needs to hear it tonight. And I will see you in the next one.